It's
Uh-huh.
funny because I think we're writing a genre that doesn't really exist. I mean,
Yeah.
they call it narrative nonfiction, perhaps,
Mhm.
but it's like there's always this obsession with the active voice.
Join me for this coaching call where we discuss how do you add historical context to your family history stories. I recently had a viewer ask some questions based on some previous conversations we had, which generated a video where he changed my mind. I'll make sure I'll link to that video in the description box. But he asked a follow-up question where when I suggested, "Hey, you're writing about your ancestors and you're talking about your research journey and the story that you have. How about you do two things? One, keep the one you have because you have a wonderful container for your research journey and what you discover about your ancestors. But then take the story about your individual ancestor out and let that be a standalone story. So if somebody wants to connect with you on your research journey plus their ancestor stories, you have that because that actually was kind of fun. But if I want to learn about your ancestor, in this case, it was Cora, I just want to read her story. Now, I have had videos on this channel before where I talked about where you can find historical context. And then I also have videos about why you should add historical context, but it didn't have a video about how. Now, this video is a little bit long. It actually is truncated from the conversation we had. Plus, the internet went out during the coaching call, so I have a little section that I tacked on at the end that Jim will see for the first time when he watches this video, but we'll all make sure we see those final details together. Join me for this coaching call where we discuss how do you add historical context to your family history stories. I'm considering doing the two containers with Cora and Stillman and your parent, but others people's you struggle with. And so the question was, how does one create a true story when so much is missing? When
Yes.
does filling in cross over into fiction? And do I have a podcast on it? No, but but that's why we now have this coaching call.
Yeah, because there are some ones that tempt me. There's a granduncle who the legend said he tried to outrun a train and he lost.
Uh-huh.
But when I look at what he did for a living, and it was an error in judgment more than likely. It was an accident.
Mhm.
But I do not have a lot of details about him. I have
Right.
very few.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pull up I had a view where the two of us were there. There we go. We'll get that one.
Yeah,
All right, so this is Joseph Geislzer. This is my immigrant ancestor that I told you
right,
about. He was the Catholic that came over from Baden.
right,
Now, I only had 4 records for him.
right.
And so I had his naturalization record, his marriage record, one census record, and well, I actually had a little more than 4. He was named on all of his kids' birth certificates. Okay.
Right, right.
Really, I started with 4 basic types of records. Anything about him, there was just the naturalization record, the marriage record, and I don't really have the death record, but he was the only person in this Catholic church, we knew where he worshiped, that had a death date with that kind of name. It was spelled with a K rather than a G. And then I discovered the G can have a hard g sound. It
Yeah,
almost does. So sometimes it gets misinterpreted with a K. So I really only
right,
have
right.
3 records and then all his kids that I identified him. So you said, well, how do you write a story when you're filling all the gaps? Well, I was gonna do some show and tell if you don't mind, and I'll just
Go
kind of
ahead, please,
show
please.
you some of the things I did. So the first chapter that I have was born in Baden, and I'm just starting with this. He was born in 1836 in the Duchy Duchy of Baden,
Yeah,
and then I do have the birth
the
date of
reference.
where it
Yes, the
came from.
reference. Yes.
Yeah. Um, but then so actually the one is a footnote and the little I is the source at the bottom, but I don't need to go to that.
Yeah,
So I went ahead and even though it's not super narrative style, um, I go ahead and say the precise village is unknown. Most of the Germanic ducal regions, including Baden, were mostly Catholic, while this is Northern. And I went ahead and put that in because that Lutheran's going to come up later with his wife's story. So it was
Right.
like a little foreshadowing, you know?
Yeah.
And then because I'm not trying to absolutely take people into the setting, as walk around and store. I'm still kind of being a narrator. This is the person and this is what happened. That's the kind of approach I'm taking. Again, I'd use this. It's believed he migrated
Right.
here, and that's all calculations based on his declaration of intent information. So I'm giving context, that historical context, to help people understand, why is it, when he comes over, what does he have to do? What could we know? So it's all kind of foggy.
Right.
And then I went there, and then I started, I love to ask questions. What made him leave?
Right.
And then I give a tease, perhaps the
Yeah.
answers lie in the history. So the entire next section, I'm going to give some history of Baden.
Yes.
Because I don't
I
know
like
anything
it.
about Baden. I'm from America,
Yeah.
and I'm
Yeah.
from Texas, and we teach Texas history. We don't teach the other 49 states all that much. So going through, telling it a little bit about it, because then I can go through and say, yeah, I have no idea. Like, here's Baden,
Yeah.
even though it's rather small when you actually put it on a map. Where in the world he was from is really hard to tell. And so that's kind of what I'm alluding to later. But this entire section is all context because I don't have stories of where he's from. And actually, I went to this palace on this past summer. Yeah, was it? No, we went to Lithuania this summer. So last summer, we went to this palace
Okay.
because it was the closest I could get to Baden of where my ancestor was from. And so
Right.
I'm trying to establish like in a place where I had no details. If I wanted to go pay tribute to my ancestor because I happened to be in the area, where would I go? And so
Yes.
we go to this palace, and it was amazing. They've actually turned it into a history museum rather than a palace, but it still maintained the palace aspect. So it was kind of nice. But I don't claim that he actually ever stepped foot here, but I'm just giving that context.
Yes.
So that's the first thing I do. I have different clippings from newspapers about I didn't know this, and this was the likely push factor for him. Why would he have migrated in 1853?
Right.
Well, there was
Right.
this revolution in 1848 to unify the Germanic people. And then
Yes.
following that, yes, there was a crop failure, but most people started going to America after that. And so I
Right.
would have that insight in there just to kind of understand, well, why would he have left? What was it
Left. Right.
like? And so forth. So
I
then,
like this. I like this.
yeah.
Yes, no, it makes sense. It makes
Hmm.
sense. And I think part of the reason I wound up going the path that I went in, and
Hmm.
maybe I don't need to do this, is when you talk to writing coaches, they'll talk about stay away from the passive voice. It's like you have to use the active voice all the time. So when you're saying, I know, and I get it. And it's funny
Uh-huh.
because I think we're writing a genre that doesn't really exist. I mean,
Yeah.
they call it narrative nonfiction, perhaps,
Mhm.
but it's like there's always this obsession with the active voice, and
Mhm.
it's hard to pull yourself out
Mhm.
um, of the story and say things like it is believed that,
Right.
unless you use the passive voice. And maybe
Right.
I shouldn't be so worried about that
Mhm.
with these particular stories.
Right.
That could be something that I could just kind of let go of.
Yeah.
Because I think if I had done that, I would have put in a lot more context
Mhm.
on the chorus story about what was going on at the time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. 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 I have two examples because this was one of my earliest iteration, and it didn't have Grammarly catching me on passive voice all the time.
yes,
Now,
yes,
I will tell you, initially, when I started using Grammarly and it was pointing out passive voice, I would go and try to rewrite it. I mean, still being that narrate, however it is believed, and turn it into a more active phrase to say it
yeah,
is believed, but more active, if you will. Um, But there's times where I'm like, no, I'm purposely choosing to keep it this way because I don't want to confuse the
Yes.
reader of
Yes.
who is doing the action in the story. So I take the recommendations and then I make an educated decision on what would be the best way to tell this story. So
I
yeah.
like it. I like it a lot because I think that you're absolutely right. The context is absolutely critical. And when
Mhm.
you tell the story and you're giving the background of where he or she lived at the time, and
Yeah.
you did exactly what you were saying that you're doing. You're giving the reader the understanding of, wow, this is why he did this. This is
Yeah.
why he moved.
Yeah.
Like
Now,
so.
it could be something else. He could have killed somebody, right?
Yeah, right. It could have, but
Right? But we're
but
going to go with the Occam razors. The least amount of assumptions you have to make is the likely reason. And then,
yes.
because you had said, what if you write it and it turns out the legend was true, but you thought it wasn't, or that. We write the best we can. And then if new evidence comes out, we write an updated version,
Yeah, yeah.
you
And
know?
that has been happening. I have since discovered from some new clippings
Uh-huh.
that the Japanese janitor who I wrote the opening of the story of Cora and Stillman,
Uh-huh.
it turned out that he worked for Stillman. He was the and you can't say this in the present day. He was the Japanese houseboy
There you go.
for
Why
for
can't we say
Stillman.
that? Oh, it is what he was. That's what he was called. So
That's what he was
I
called.
hate that
I
because
know.
I was expecting you to say something even more racist
Yeah.
or offensive.
No, it doesn't take much,
That was his
trust me.
that was his job. What that would be called. Anyway,
But
sorry.
that now that changes the whole context of the opening of the story. Is not only did Mr. Higashi find this man, but this man was somebody he knew. This man
Yeah.
was his employer, and
Yeah.
he was going to work for him. And there he was on the sidewalk. That's
Yeah.
dramatic.
Well, and then what's going to happen to him? He's got to get a new job because his employer's
Right,
gone.
exactly, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
But this didn't emerge until later. This emerged when Ancestry added some new newspapers to
Nice.
their open. Then I found it, and they
Perfect.
gave me newspapers gave me an alert that there was some new information from Stillman. And Stillman and Cora is one of these cases where the records had so much information
Mhm.
that it was not difficult to fill in the story.
Yeah.
But I like how you're doing this, and you have answered my question.
Okay.
It's
Well, let me
so
keep going if you don't mind. I
no,
like
go
show and
ahead.
tell. So the next thing, and this opened my eyes so much. I was like, where could he have gone? Because the
Right.
ultimate question is why Columbus, Ohio when you're German? Right? And I'd actually been to this village. Well, I've been to Hanover, and it's very rural village. And I went to Karlsruhe, and it's very city, so I don't remember really the landscaping. And he probably because he went into farming, he probably was rural. So anyway, I'm like, but why Ohio? That's the ultimate question. And so before we can answer why Ohio, we have to go, where actually could he have gone? And I found a really great source that was talking about German immigration following that 1848 revolution that I hadn't known about before I started
Right.
researching him.
Right.
And they said he could go to England, Australia, or the United States of America. And I was like, Australia, what? Because I thought only Australians were coming from the British Isles. I had no idea there were Germans that were going to Australia. And
Yeah.
sure enough, it was backed up when I went to the history museums. They did talk about Germans that came over as early as he could have. So I'm like, okay. And then what I did is I went through and I talked about if he would have gone to Australia, what have the conditions been like?
Right.
And then I talked about how long it
Yes.
would have taken, compare that to United States, what's happening there. I
Yes.
also uh, I didn't go into England and the other places too much because I was just like, Australia stood out to me. So I made the executive decision. Okay, yeah, Australia is a little too far. England, probably not. United States. Okay. And then I went in and I started talking about he's coming in the 1853 time frame. What's happening in the United States? So which state would he have chosen? Texas actually had a big German population, so he could have gone there, especially since he was Catholic. And then I found some other region. And then eventually I found out why Ohio was likely a chosen location for him. So I go through and I give all of this details about what his choice is. And because I know he went to Columbus, then I can confidently say, well, he chose here. Because most immigrants, again, Occam's raisins, they choose their destination before they head to it.
Yes.
Most do, because few people are going to go and just say, all right, Lord, take me now, you know. Where do you want me to go? Now, are there people that are like, okay, God, or they're the role of Geislzer, or oops, I got in trouble again, I'll just run. Most people, if they're going to make that journey, are going to have some idea of the destination. And for him, since what I believe is he was a single man, he's going to go to a location that has amenities that could then point him into a direction to get land and get established very quickly. And because he bought property next to his father-in-law and a man from his father-in-law's village, something tells me they all met up. Here's my likely theory, because they're two different religions. They likely met up in those social support for Germans coming to Columbus, and then they went out. And that makes the most logical sense, because that's why those organizations were set up.
Yeah.
And we have evidence that those organizations were set up in order to do that very thing. So I don't think it's too far of a leap to say. Now, I don't go and say that's how they met, but I can establish. So he probably went to a city that had these kind of social organizations that helped him know the next step, because his witness in his naturalization papers is the local grocer. And he's settled outside of Columbus. And so for the local grocer to be his support, and I've seen his name a couple of times, something tells me there was this network, right? So I have these circumstantial evidence that allows me to then say he made this choice because there was a network established to then, you know, because he's not the first one in the area. He's coming after these community organizations were set up. So that's kind of how I added some history into his story on the front end, particularly. Do you have any questions?
No, it makes absolute sense. And I think what I really like about it is you're bringing up history, and in the process of looking for the context and the circumstantial evidence, you're actually learning history. I would probably be learning history as well. And I think that is going to, when you're publishing that story, you're actually giving people an insight as to what the world was like during those days. And it's very easy, especially in the face of presentism, to not understand these. Like, for example, making this hard decision of traveling. We're used to right now being able to hop on a plane, ship your clothes somewhere or something, and just easily move. We've had friends who have done that. In those days, this was a serious decision.
Yeah, exactly.
You did not take it lightly.
No.
It was, not only was it irreparable in terms of a decision, it was dangerous.
Yeah. Great. All right. So the next thing I wanted to do was show you a different way that I'm going to, it's still in the rough stage, but I haven't written in a long time, and I didn't want to have imposter syndrome. So I've been writing about William Townsend. So it's not formatted yet, but we'll start up here. And there's some euphemistic things where he carries a lot of weight on his shoulders. You know, it's a different style than Joseph's books, because I have more records, and I can make that claim because he was in the Civil War, and he got sick. He never actually got injured in fighting. But he went on a excursion. I don't know what to call it, but he went out to try to because they heard rumors that the rebels were coming. And so he was on a troop, not necessarily to scout, but to scout less repel if possible. Well, they went in, it turned out to nothing. So they came back. But the people that went on that excursion, that little jaunt, they all got sick, or a good portion of it got sick. And 2 people died, and a lot of people didn't return to battle. So he became a blinded farmer. And so now it's 1880, and he's providing for a large family. He and his wife really liked each other and made a lot of children.
Yes.
So I feel like I can make a claim of, because this style is more, I'm putting you into the story, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
then leading in, at 38 years old, he has long days of planting, harvesting under the Ohio sun and harsh winters. Now,
Right.
again, I'm not sure if I want to use that relentless Ohio sun, because when I think of Ohio, I don't think a lot of sun, because I grew up in the South, but I did.
It gets hot.
Yeah. But when you are in the sun, regardless of the sun, it's hard to do farmer. So I'm playing around with some of that. Anyway, so then I don't know exactly all his symptoms, but I know that he started having kidney failure. And that's what he died of. That's what his doctors had treated. So I went and got some symptoms of kidney failure.
Yes.
I used ChatGPT. I used ChatGPT to try to give it to me, and then I'm going to go and refine it. He might not have had all of those symptoms, but Carol Baxter, in that video I had with her, she said you can make some judgments. And given that she had kidney disease, these are likely symptoms.
Yes. No, I think that makes sense. You can go for the probable. I actually did that in Cora's story because I described Stillman on the sidewalk and mentioned that he had red splotches on his chest. That's a symptom of trauma from falling.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So you're already doing that. And remember that I say I really like to ask questions. Yes. So instead of implying somebody had certain feelings, I will often ask a question, would they have? And so you could see that. How long could William continue under the backbreaking farm labor? Would Mary be able to supplement their income through domestic? Like, you see, I'm asking those questions without implying that was a challenge. And that's one of the techniques I really, really, really like, because we're not writing fiction. We're trying to narrativize facts that we've gathered to humanize these people that are just on a death certificate, right?
Yes.
And so I've never met these people. They lived during the Civil War. So that's one of the ways I try to humanize in without. So there's some judgments I'll make, and then there's others where I want to imply and get my reader to think.
Yeah.
And that's one strategy. Now, normally, remember I have a video about sidebars and how powerful those sidebars are.
Mm-hmm.
So it isn't Google Docs, you can't make sidebars and put text in it. So this is one of the ways. I'm still in my draft pre-formatting stage.
Just create a head. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm like, I made it yellow or a different color, and then I have sidebars to remind me when I put this in to Word, then I'll format it there. I really like drafting in Google. Anyway, so I had the chronic illness on the farm when the body failed the summer. That was a ChatGPT. Right. I didn't like it, so I can take it out. But then I can go in and give more of the factual stuff and use a more, hey, here's some information you like to know voice. And then that way I have this decision-making voice of me being on his shoulder kind of going around, where Joseph's voice was more almost research report narrative, like I call it, like a high school kid would do.
Yeah.
Here's my ancestor, blah, 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 blah. And this one is, let's follow William on his journey. That makes sense.
One of the conventions that's existed in publishing with the idea of the sidebar is, if it's possible, you can box the entire section.
Uh-huh.
When you create a box of the entire set, it actually implies this is a sidebar
Yeah,
and with
yeah.
the right kind of head. So that's one way to deal with it.
Right, exactly. So I could just insert it within the text and then
What
it's a box, or it could have it like a side, or
yes.
in Joseph's, I did have a couple sidebars. They were like the name Geislzer and all the spelling variation. Because it was I usually publish 6x9s. One whole page was the Geislzer thing. So you could see it. It was shaded in a different color, and you
Right.
can know, oh, this really isn't the continuation of the story. If you want to read it, you can. If not, it's not going to detract. So
Yep. Yep.
sidebars are I love sidebars. I'm so glad that Carol Baxter told us about sidebars. But then
Yeah.
I wanted to show you another sidebar that I have going on in here. I think it's in this one.
Wow, this
Um,
this is quite a story.
yeah, yeah. And I've got quotes that are taken in
Yeah.
from him. So I didn't want to write in his voice, but he had somebody write for him his testimony of getting injured and put it in the pension records. And so I just
Right.
grabbed the whole thing. I wanted him to talk for himself. I'm trying to find the election. Maybe it's not in that one. Let me try election. That might be too recent. Life after war. That sounds like the right chapter. Because when I came across this one election story, I was like, I have to put that in there. Disputed election of 1876. Okay,
Uh-huh.
so 1876, this is after the war and whatnot. The
Rough
Republican candidate Rutherby Hayes was an
Rutherford Hayes,
Ohioan,
yes.
and I talk about, I like put him in the setting, and then I do because because we've had some disputed elections. I'm not
Oh,
going to tell you
yes.
what side I'm on, but can we agree? People said this is the most disputed election of all time.
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes, I love the hyperbole.
yes, uh, many voters were weary from Republican rules and scandals, were ready for change, as with the economy failing. Um, let's see. Newspapers reported that children had the lead at the end of the day and that Hayes went to bed convinced he had lost. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Oh, but
Yeah.
reverse. But the next day, contested returns from Florida, always Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina threw the outcomes into chaos. Tilden won the popular vote. And then I go through and I talk about critics branded him Rutherford and his fraudulency because of how they didn't even have until March, they didn't know who the new president was. And
Right.
now part of me, I mean, I don't know how my ancestor voted, and I never and say that he did, but part of me when I'm writing history is I want to uncover these stories that my ancestor lived in and
Yes.
put him into the story so that whoever reads go, oh, this is just propaganda. There's been disputed elections for a very long time. You
Yes,
know what
there
I mean?
has. Oh, yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
so do I have to put it in there? No, but I'm choosing to put it in there.
I think it's good that you did. I think it's good that you did because, again, people in the modern age think, "Oh, it's never been so horrible."
Mhm.
Yes, it has. It's been worse, actually.
Exactly. Exactly. And but I wanted to point out, notice I'm not saying, for the first time, he and his siblings joined with the Americans nationwide to cast their ballots on the same day in November,
Right.
right? I am saying that he and his siblings joined with others. Now,
Yeah.
I don't actually have proof that he voted, but he was a veteran. He likely voted,
Yes.
right?
No, it's a logical assumption.
Yeah.
It's a
And now
logical
I
assumption.
probably should change that now that I'm thinking his brothers, because when he did have a sister and she didn't have the right to vote then. So I
Right.
went ahead and changed that now that I was thinking of it, just to be more clear.
Right.
But chances are they voted, right? This is shortly after the
Yeah.
war.
Yes. Yes. I
They've
think it's
been through a whole bunch of stuff. But I never say he had this belief. So the coaching call ended abruptly, but I wanted to give a few more insights that I thought might be valuable. If you're liking the idea of a coaching call and maybe either want to participate in one in the future, or if you would like to be just see more of them, please let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. So let me share a few more things that I wanted to share with the coaching call, and that is a few more of the ways that you can add some historical context. Now, my ancestor lived in the Civil War, and after the Civil War, President Lincoln was shot. And so I went ahead and incorporated the details about the fact that Lincoln's funeral train took the body through Columbus, Ohio. Now, one of the reasons why I chose to include this is because William left from the Columbus station and went off to serve in his unit, the Company K 133rd that I've written about on the or that I talked about on the main channel. And so what I did is I went ahead and incorporated this story about the Lincoln's body going on that train because he went through that same station. So I already have a previous anchor point of Columbus Station, and now we're coming in with a second one that had a large event for the area of Columbus. So when you have historical ties to places your ancestors have been, then definitely include those in your story. Now you can include it as a sidebar, or I also included it in the text, as you can read here. Um, Private Joys Unfolded. This refers to what I just finished talking about the weddings that were happening in the family. And now I'm going to bring in the historical context. On April 9th, 1865, Robert E. Lee surrendered. The relief of the end of the war was short lived. Less than a week later, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated and his body was carried back to Springfield along this route. So that's a historical context within the story of William. And then I'll have this sidebar that talks about the train. And I get out of that voice that I was mentioning to Jim of the narrative voice, and I get the factual tone for there. Now, one more thing I thought of sharing was the season of weddings. Now, if you watched my main channel, you saw that I talked about the research project I did for the Ohio 133rd so that I can add context to the stories of William's life. Who did he serve with? What happened in their life? What commonalities did they have? So on and so forth. Now, I added a number of those details into the story when he served. So you can hear there were a number of Germans, there was some recent British immigrants, there were people from Kentucky, there were people from a number of different places serving together, and that would impact a unit. And how could these different people come together and serve for any length of time? That was the point of doing that research. Well, then I decided to talk about how William met Mary, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later. But I took some of the trends from his unit and I put it into a sidebar. Of waves of weddings quickly followed the return of the Ohio 133rd. In September 1864 alone, 3 men, John Bell, Company F, James Oldham, Company K, Elijah, don't know how to say that last name, of Company A. By the year ends, a total of 11 marriages had taken place among the regiments, and one of them was William. And so then I can talk a little bit more about the pace continuing on to 1865. Within that year, 47 men of the regiment were wed, 6 from William's Company K. Now, that is definitely a way to put context in your story when you do a larger group project. However, very few people are going to be insane like me and research 1,000 men just to get a few details in the sidebar. But if you do, go down that rabbit trail. Here's a way to bring those details in. With this coaching call, I hope you could see the back and forth of Jim processing and me asking, doing some show and tell, him asking questions, and me sharing some feedback. I hope that you enjoyed this session and you share your comments. What have you learned? What did you not know before? Because you saw how Jim thought, oh, I can free myself of these limitations in this. I like what he said, this new world, this new area of writing, family histories, where there are not a lot of hard and fast rules that you will find in creative writing or nonfiction or fiction. We have a little more freedom. The key is, what stories do we want to share and how quickly can we get them finished? Because imperfectly finished is better than perfectly stuck in our head. We'll see you next time. Bye.